Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today I have a hand that I played in a $5,000 buy-in event where we deal with someone who is limping. This is early in the day, the tournament just got started, and typically you will find that a lot of players are not at the table when the tournament first starts. Many amateur players look at this and think, oh my god, I don't want to play shorthanded. But in reality, if your table is anywhere near reasonable, you should really take this opportunity to play because you get to play many more pots. And if you expect to have an edge in the pots you play, you should, in theory, win more money. Of course, sometimes you end up losing big pots or going broke even, but more often than not, you will chip up if you are a good player. And if you're not a good player, if you're not a good shorthanded player, you should really get some experience. The fact that you think you may not be good at something does not mean you should drastically avoid it. You should make a point to get good at the things you are not good at. I actually keep a spreadsheet in my phone of all the things that I want to be working on immediately. And that can be, like, for example, 5-bet pots, or defending the blinds with a wide range, or leading the flop. A lot of things like that I am typically working on. But you should look for things that you want to work on. And whenever you have that opportunity, make sure you take it. Anyway, 40-year-old guy, I do not know him. He limps from the button, and I have Jack 6 of diamonds in the small blind. We're playing 300 big blinds deep. Actually, 280 big blinds deep because I've already lost a decent pot, it seems. A decent pot, 2,000 chips, lost a huge pot. Anyway, I'm going to call in this spot. I don't think you want to raise. If you raise, the guy on the button's going to call you very frequently, and that means you have to see a flop out of position with a marginal hand, and that's not really where you want to be. So flop comes King 6-4, 1 diamond, which is a reasonably good flop. You would think that the player on the button would not limp very many kings, unless they are very weak kings, and even then he may just fold those, or he may raise them entirely. So I have to assume I have the best hand most of the time, unless the player in the big blind happens to have a decently strong hand as well. This is a spot where I think both leading and checking are fine. I think leading is probably ideal, though, because notice pretty much any turn card besides a Jack of 6 or a diamond is pretty bad for me. And, well, it's not necessarily pretty bad, but it could easily improve my opponent. So imagine I'm against a hand like Ace 9 and 8-7. Letting them both see a turn card for free is kind of a disaster. So I like leading in this spot. We can get value from some worse hands, and we also make hands that have plenty of equity fold. Remember, you always want to make bets that lead your opponents to make mistakes. And this is a spot where I do think our opponents will make mistakes if I lead. Turn is a 10, offsuit 10, certainly not what I'm looking for. And I decide to check. I check, and if my opponent bets, I'm probably going to call, but I could see folding being fine. You have to realize that whenever you bet 200 into a 300 pot, it may sound like a big bet, but it's actually quite small compared to our opponent's stack. So I think he's going to stick around on the flop with a very wide range. The 10 should not be too useful for him, because typically he would fold a hand like Jack 10 or Queen 10 or 10-9. So I'm not so worried about the 10. I think if I was beat on the flop, I think if I was beat pre-flop, I'm crushed now, and I think that if I was ahead on the flop, I am still ahead. So I'm probably going to check call and see what develops. But it goes check, which leads me to think I certainly have the best hand going to the river. River is a 6. And now I decided to do something I don't do too often, but I decided to bet 3 times the size of the pot for value. If you remember the last episode, well, the last video I did for Poker News, I made a 2 times all-in river bluff. Now we're betting 3 times the pot on the river for value. This may seem crazy, but if you get the vibe that your opponent thinks that you are aggressive and you may be inclined to run a big bluff, this is a fantastic spot to bet huge. My opponent almost never has a 6. He probably doesn't have a king, but at the same time, he likely has some sort of bluff catcher. So if he has some sort of bluff catcher, do I think he will ever make a huge call thinking that I am, quote-unquote, obviously trying to push him off of whatever he has? And this is a very read-based thing. I imagine I had lost some chips early in this tournament. It looks like we started with 30,000 and I was down to 28,000. And perhaps that means that I already ran a bluff and got called. Perhaps that means that something's happened that may make my opponents think that I'm crazy. Maybe I decided to do something pre-flop that did not work. But if you have sort of a losing image and a desperate image, even though we did just start the tournament, right? You can often get away with making these plays, and you will get paid off way more often than you would think. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if the opponent calls with ace high here, because many of the obvious draws that I could have, the random gut shots on the flop, and just the stone bluffs, they pretty much all miss. And in order for me to have a value hand here, I pretty much have to have a 6. And a lot of people would not think you would lead the flop with a 6. So I like this bet. Hopefully he calls. Let's see. He does call. I guess we're not going to get to see his hand. Oh, we do get to see his hand. He shows 7-4 for bottom pair. We had him the whole way. But this goes to show you that if you do have a loose aggressive image and your opponents think you will be capable of bluffing, you can make these giant bets and get called. It's very important to know what your bet is likely to induce. If you think your bet is likely to result in your opponent folding a ton, you probably want to do it as a bluff. If you think your bet's going to make your opponent call a ton, or if you think your opponent will call any bet size, you should strongly consider making that big bet. And this may look like a spot where you very, very rarely get called, but clearly my opponent called with a 4. So if he's calling with a 4, he's calling with a lot of hands. So it's a fun hand. It's a fun spot. This doesn't come up too often, but when it does, you want to make sure you take advantage of it. That's going to be it for this video. I want to thank you for watching. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Little. Be sure to check back next week for another fun poker hand. Thanks for watching.